More light has been shed on the massacre of the Polish nationals carried out by the Soviet secret police in 1940. Russia's archive agency has published on its website copies of once top-secret documents that show the decision to kill them was approved at the highest level. Well, Katyn Massacre now joins me live with more on this. Katyn, what sort of documents are we talking about here?
Well, Alice, the documents that have been released have actually been made available to Russian historians and Polish historians in order for them to establish what has happened and to rightfully establish and document the course of history. But according to the head of the Russian Archives Service, this is the most secret package of documents that existed in the Soviet Union. It was dubbed package number 1 and consisted, amongst other things, of the order of the letter from the head of Russian secret police, Lavrentiy Beria, to the head of the Soviet Union at the time, Joseph Stalin, suggesting the execution of Polish war prisoners taken prisoner in the late 1930s. And that letter suggested that those prisoners be executed without any explanation, without much further ado, just simply shot on the spot in different locations across the Soviet Union. It also has the execution order signed by the head of the secret police and the head of the Soviet state, by Mr. Stalin himself. And of course, those documents were long denied, and the very fact of the Katyn massacre was long denied by the Soviet Union. Soviet Union absolutely refused any knowledge of the fate of some 20-odd thousand Polish officers that were taken prisoner in 1938 and executed in the spring of 1940. It wasn't until Mikhail Gorbachev came to power that he publicly acknowledged the Katyn massacre and apologized to his Polish counterpart and the Polish people. The first Russian president, Boris Yeltsin, actually made some of the documents relating to this horrible tragedy available to historians in both Russia and Poland so that the true course of events may finally be established. We know that the massacre of Polish officers was actually named the Katyn Massacre, but Katyn in Western Russia is just one of the locations where the Polish officers were executed. In Katyn itself, a little under 4,500 officers were executed in the middle of the night and buried in mass graves. The very fact of their deaths denied for decades, of course, and the rest of the captured prisoners were executed in various other locations across the Soviet Union. So Katyn is a very tragic place for Poland, for Soviet history. But of course, it's not only tragic because of that. Prior to the execution of Polish officers there in the spring of 1940, thousands and thousands of Russian political prisoners were executed there in the late 1930s. Let's have a listen to the head of the Russian State Archive.
As for Katyn, I must say that it is a tragic place, not only for Poles, but also for us as Russian and former Soviet citizens. Katyn trenches hide many more members of the Russian party and administrative officials, as well as around 10,000 ordinary Russian people who were shot dead between 1936 and 1938. Later on, the same technologies and methods were used in the crime against Polish prisoners of war.
So as Mr. Artizov has just said, of course, Katyn has become a very tragic place for both Soviet and Polish history. And the very fact of the releasing of the documents relating to the massacre has gone a long way to repair relations between Russia and Poland.
Well, let's talk about those relations, Katya. Clearly, this is a highly emotive issue. And how did the Katyn tragedy as a whole affect Russian-Polish relations?
Moscow and Warsaw are badly affected by the very fact of the massacre. Of course, the Soviet Union denying for years, decades even, that the very fact of the massacre existed, saying that they had no idea of the fate of the Polish officers. Some officials even saying that the Polish prisoners of war were actually released and simply got lost somewhere in the vast territory of the Soviet Union, or simply avoided all the counts and check-ins that were available for the prisoners of war in order for their countries to know that they're alive and respond well, but of course it was when Mikhail Gorbachev came to power that he acknowledged the fact of the Katyn massacre, and that has gone some way to soothe and to better improve the relations between Russia and Poland. But of course Poland has always been stressing the need to release all the documents relating to the massacre, because the Polish side was possibly even more affected by not the massacre itself, but the lies that went with it and the denials of the Soviet Union of any participation in this terrible event for decades. Just recently, the relations between Russia and Poland have started to improve, specifically when the Russian and Polish prime ministers attended a commemorating ceremony in Katyn. The Polish prime minister saying that even a year ago it was impossible to imagine the Russian prime minister bowing his head and paying his respects to the mass graves of the Polish soldiers murdered there, but that did happen, and the relations were on their way to improve, both sides breathing a sigh of relief, hoping for a new page in their joint history. Of course, only days after that, a new terrible tragedy occurred in Katyn when Polish President Lech Kaczynski, on his way there to participate in a commemorating ceremony as well, died in a plane crash along with his wife and most of Poland's political elite. So this has become yet another tragic aspect on relations, on the relations between Moscow and Warsaw. Of course, the investigation results are said to be due to, the first stage of the investigation is said to be due to be released by the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk today. Russia and Poland have been jointly investigating the crash, and whilst it was definitely a tragic accident, an accident nonetheless, for many Polish people this has made Katyn an even more tragic place.
Okay, Kathy, many thanks for that. That was artist correspondent Katarina Azarova reporting from central Moscow for us.